Tools for Railway Modelers, the sequel, Tools 2. Roll the intro. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. A few months ago I produced Tools 1, and if you haven't seen it there should be a link up here to take you to it. I watched it last night for a refresher and couldn't stop laughing. It's quite sad really when you laugh at your own stuff. In it, the opening sequence, I made a couple of sort of controversial points. The first one was the fact that all railway modelers perhaps should have a fire extinguisher in their railway room, garage, loft, etc. Because if you get a small fire, at least then you can have a go at putting it out rather than just running and phoning 999. Now I know this is a contentious issue and people might not want to kind of fight their own little fire, but some of the work that we do as railway modelers, it has a fire hazard. I mean, if you do a lot of soldering and you leave your soldering iron there and it falls off on the floor or whatever, it could well sort of burn your railway room down or your house. Fair point. Someone would have to comment on my on the comment section below, and it was his point of view. I have no problem with it. I'm not sort of taking offence at it whatsoever, but I'll just read what the gentleman said. And he said, "Fire extinguisher? Are you mad? Seriously, Charlie, most people have their railway room in the loft, shed, cellar or garage. Generally, these rooms are poorly ventilated and the extinguisher you pull out is carbon dioxide. This will kill someone in a loft quicker than the fire would. Do try to tell your viewers they should use a foam or dry powder. By the way, I'm not health and safety." I wrote back to the gentleman and said, sadly, we're going to have to disagree on this one. Placing a CO2 fire extinguisher at the door is a very sensible suggestion. Clearly, you need confidence in your ability. If you did have a fire, you don't have to fight it, but you have the option to do so. Rather that than watch your shed, home, loft burn down. Early intervention is key. A few blasts of a CO2 fire extinguisher will not render you unconscious, and keeping your back to your exit is key. And what I meant by that is if you put your fire extinguisher by the door and the place does catch fire, you can go to the door. If you fancy a go, you can grab your fire extinguisher and perhaps extinguish, I don't know, some newspaper, whatever you set fire to. You know, rather than if you're in the loft, rather than try and trundle down the stairs, go and get a bucket of water, run back upstairs and heave a bucket of water over it. I think it's a sensible suggestion to have a fire extinguisher in your railway room by the door so you have the option. If you disagree, that's absolutely fine, but what I do suggest is just have a word with your local fire prevention officer and let him have a look at your layout and see what he thinks, because our layouts are somewhat, what should I say, some people's wiring is somewhat unusual, let's say, and there could be a fire risk with that. If you leave your layout unattended and running, again, there could be risks. And if you're using things like a blow lamp, which I did, if you recall my my viaduct water, where I used my wife's blow lamp to lift out the bubbles from the resin. Obviously I mentioned soldering, and these kind of functions, they are not without risk, so I think it's quite a sensible idea. But clearly, not only this chap, but someone else mentioned that it wasn't such a wonderful thing to do. Someone mentioned that we should be using a foam or dry powder. Yeah, okay, but if I didn't want to cover my layout in foam and powder, I just wanted to extinguish a small fire. You know, it's not the sort of thing you want to risk life and limb, you know, and die in your room. But that's where I am with that subject. And so let's move on away from fire extinguishers. I also mentioned a first aid kit, and I stand by that. You know, it's not a silly idea to have a first aid kit. I mean, I've got myself with enough scalpels now to know better. But I still keep doing it. Bizarre, really. One thing I did omit, forget or whatever, is to have a mobile phone with you. Why wouldn't you? If you're going up in the loft and you have a, I don't know, a heart attack, TIA, these kind of things, you know, we're not spring chicken, some of us modelers anymore, and you need to phone for help, or you fall over, or you super glue your hands to something. Just you probably couldn't use the phone if you super glued your hands, could you? Anyway, is have a mobile phone with you, or a cordless phone, you know, these kind of things. The phone down and get some help if you get in trouble. Right, okay, let's get on with some fresh tools. So let's talk about rolling stock. This arrived in the post today. It's a Bachmann 16-ton slope-sided mineral wagon, and my rake of mineral wagons is a bit boring really. They're all the kind of same size and shape, so I thought I'd intermingle some of these slope-sided ones. Once I've changed the deck holes, I think it'll look pretty good. So what do we need to do with these regarding model railway tools? Well, the first thing to do with them really is to check that the back-to-backs, that's the distance between the inside flanges, as it were, of the wheels, are the correct distance. And I believe that to use a 14.6 back-to-back gauge. So what do we do with that? Well, hopefully you can see it's got some cutouts, and all you do is drive this down between the wheels. Okay, excuse me while I reach my glasses. Drive it down between the wheels and it forces the wheels apart, and therefore you get the correct distance between them. There we go. So that's the back-to-backs on this wagon checked, and it's good to go. You can't really use these on locos. Those are machined distances and they should be right coming out of the box, and if they're not right, then clearly you need to send it back. But for rolling stock or your coaches, your wagons, I use a 14.6 and it works fine for me. There are other ones available, you know, with you know, sort of perhaps 14 or 15 mil or whatever, but this is the one I use. But I have seen sort of minor changes, but make sure you buy the right one for 00. Obviously you're not going to go and buy it for P, or what's the other one? EM gauge. So easy. So what we'll look at now is we'll look at track, and then later on in the video a lot of people have been asking about multimeters, so I'll cover that last. Right, let's get on with some track. Sleeper spacing has always been an issue with 00 gauge modelers, because 00 track is kind of HO track really. It's just that all the locos and rolling stock have their wheels pulled in to fit on HO track, and as I'm sure you're aware, Pico have now brought out a new sexy looking bullhead track, and there's the original Pico Code 100, and there is clearly significant difference. Now some modelers have gotten into the habit of simply taking a Stanley blade and cutting the webbing on ordinary HO track, which kind of makes sense, and then you can just simply pull the sleepers apart. And good old Steve-O from Railway Laser Lines has come up with an ingenious little kind of jig type gauge, and all he's done is got a piece of perspex and cut the notches out which represent where they go on the sleepers. And so once you've taken a Stanley knife and cut through the webbing on the back, all you need to do is force this little jig onto the sleepers, and it forces the sleepers apart. And lo and behold, hopefully you can see that the sleeper spacing now is much more, God I hate this word, prototypical. There's the original, and this is where they've opened out. And it's a kind of nice little tool. And if you can't afford to get stuck into Pico's bullhead track, or you're kind of hacked off waiting for the points to come through, because there still isn't any medium radius points at this stage, which is quite a shame, that is the resulting effect, using a decent gauge to give you the right separation. That'll be a text then. I wonder if it's from Pico saying we're going to bring out the new medium radius points. Anyway, hopefully you can see the effect. Cheap and cheerful, and a little plug for him, Railway Laser Lines at railwaylaserlines.co.uk, and this is only a couple of quid. Nice little start. Good little tool like that. So sticking with track, I think these are always worth a mention. These are track setter gauges. They come in various radius or even radii, and you even get a straight one. And the reason is they really do avoid you getting dog legs in your curves, you know, and they're not exact. You know, they might not fit exactly with your curves, but you get an 18, 21, 24, 36, 42 and a straight. Those are the ones that I've got. But if you wanted, I don't know, say a 20-inch curve, then you could just use an 18 and then kind of straighten it out a little bit. They are very, very good. And I must confess, without these, you know, most modelers would be in trouble. And they couldn't, they work extremely easily. So you just pop this 21-inch gauge into the rails, and then all you need to do is turn them around, and the track takes the profile of the gauge. It really is just so simple. Yeah, absolutely great. I would not be without these track setter ones. They really are great stuff. And the straight one, I think we've all done it. We've had a piece of straight track, but when you pop it on the track, actually there's a kink or two in it, so you can always pop the straight onto the track. That'll be another text then. Pop the straight onto the track and then force him along, and it will straighten out any kinks. Oh, this is hard going, but there we are. Probably because this has been an old piece of track that's been weathered. Anyway, you can see the action of the track setter, and it certainly does straighten the track out. One other tip is when you do lay a great deal of track and you can't see if it's straight, just nip up to your wife's boudoir and pop a mirror down at one end, and then you can look into the mirror and see right down the track to see if you've got any kinks in it. So there we go, track setter. I like those. I would not be without track setter gauges when I do my track laying. One simple tool that people overlook is this simple little railer from Pico. A little bit of plastic, and I think it's under £5. Pop it on your track, and then when you want to put your rolling stock on, you just kind of roll it down, and it's straight onto the track. And when you're doing coaches and the like, then it can be a real pain. I'd gone years and years before I'd invested in one of these. I thought it was so kind of toy-like, but we live and learn. Piece of cake, this thing. Little hole in it so you can hang it up and so you don't lose it. But I shall just show you again. All you need to do is slot it into place, and there's two kind of grooves here. And then as you laid the bogies down the groove, there it is. Quite straightforward. Few quid. You need one, get one. Whether you're into DC or DCC, through Gauge Master you can get some little illuminated buffer lights, and this one here, if I put track power on, hopefully you can see this little red light comes on. But the advantage is when you've got a short, you can instantly see when your loco stop, you can just look for the buffer lights and say, buffer lights off. I've obviously got a short because I've lost track power. And just to prove a point, then that's it, there you are, a conductive Coke can or not, and you lose track power. It's a simple little innovation really, and it's kind of ideal. So, buffer lights from Gauge Master. Another interesting little innovation from Gauge Master is their wheel cleaning device, and it's made up of various blocks, and you can add them on, and all you need to do then is dial up your loco, pop it on the top, and hopefully you can hear, if I put my microphone closer, the wheels going around on this loco, and as the wheels go around they rub against the brass brushes on this device, and it cleans off the wheels. And it strikes me as, you know, a reasonably good idea. Sadly, the brushes do tend to deform slightly, and you need to kind of push them back in. But it's quite a nice little abrasive little device, and it kind of does what it says on the box really. Obviously if your loco has pickups off wheels that don't drive, if that makes sense, then you're not going to clean them, because obviously the only wheels that are going round are the driven wheels, and on this little Bobo, I mean, all 8 wheels drive. So all you need to do, to prove a point, is take it over this side, and those are being driven round and cleaned, and if I take it the other way, so are those. So a nifty little bit of kit. Westerns and things like that, class 52s, you probably need another section because of the length of the locomotive. But I quite like these, quite a useful little bit of kit. And finally, what I thought I'd talk about today is multimeters. Now, I have some kind of electrical background. I used to be a kind of a helicopter electrician of sorts. Anyway, times have moved on, and I purchased this little multimeter. It's a bit cheap and cheerful. Sadly, they're not available anymore. Well, I'm sure they are, but I got it from Maplin's, and it's powered by a 9-volt smoke alarm battery in the back. So there's a good old saying with these things, and that's RTFM. RTFM stands for read the manual. And if you're not used to these things, you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you're dealing with mains power 240 volts AC, that kind of thing. That will kind of tend to make you wince a bit when you get a nice big belt off one of these. But for model railway stuff, these are absolutely ideal. And what I'm going to do is just zoom into this area so you can see the readings that I'm getting off this piece of track, which is powered up by my old Dynamis power supply. Okay, track power's on, as you can see by the little red LED showing. And on this meter, I've set it to 200 volts AC, which is the maximum the circuits in here can then cope with. It might be strange, but DCC doesn't actually run on AC voltage. It actually runs on something called a square wave DC. But for all intents and purposes, it's easier to think of it as kind of 13, 15 volts AC. So if I now pop these probes onto the track, let me just get them in there nice and firmly, and then hopefully you can see now. So I'm measuring 13.7, I think it is. Let me get a better feel on there. 13.7 volts, sort of AC, but it's not. In reality, it's a square wave DC voltage on the track, and it's as simple as that. When I do a bit of house wiring, then I would naturally go to 500 volts AC, because domestic wiring is 240 volts AC, which obviously exceeds the 200 volts by 40 volts. Kind of easy stuff. And if you're a DC modeler, then that's no big shakes, because over on the other side, and I'm trying to read upside down, which is around here. Yep. So here's the voltage, the DC voltage. Okay, so 20 volts DC, with obviously ideal for sort of a DC modelling. You can also note that the V there and the V there both stand for voltage, and that's a straight line, because the DC voltage isn't a sinusoidal power source, and obviously AC is, because it's an actually alternating current. Piece of cake. Right. Next thing is continuity. When you measure continuity, you deal in something called ohms, and if I put this to 200 ohms, so the maximum continuity will be 200 ohms, and I take a speaker, here it is. This is should be a 100 ohm speaker that I've bought for to go into one of my sound locos. It's an old sound loco, and hopefully if I lay these down and I pop these 2 probes onto the cables, this should be a 100 ohm speaker. And well, they fibbed, it's actually a 91.9 ohm speaker, or I'm getting a little bit of power loss through these leads or whatever. Anyway, to all intents and purposes, it's a 100 ohm speaker. Great. Because if it was a 4 and 8 ohm speaker and I put it into my sound loco, it wouldn't be doing any good at all. So that's how continuity works. And then if you're doing, if you're trying to check out the continuity across a piece of track, then clearly I now need to disconnect the track power from this piece of rail, which I've now done. And then if I want to measure the resistance across this piece of track here, which is just one piece of steel, and it should go to 0. They are 0.2, so there is no resistance across this piece of steel, as you'd expect. But of course, when you're dealing with long runs of track, then obviously you need to keep an eye on the resistance within the track. So let's say you've got, I don't know, a 20-foot run of an exhibition layout or whatever, then dropping a couple of probes onto your rails and then reading off the resistance is pretty good, because you can see then if you've got a wobbly fish plate where actually there's quite a bit of resistance there and you need to pinch it up and that kind of thing, you can do it. You can also find that you've done some soldering and you might have a dry joint, and again, but you can measure the resistance when this thing is set to ohms of the resistance, you know, through certain items, certain circuitry. What you can't do, of course, is, you know, get these probes into a live circuit. We're just trying to measure basic functionality, so basic AC and DC voltages and resistance. And this is an ideal tool for that. But as I said about the manual, this is a cheap and cheerful Maplin's job really, and it actually covers 2 different meters. But if you're going to buy one of these, this type of multimeter, I might suggest you don't buy one identical to this, because there is a better one that when you pop the probes on to do resistance checks, it goes beep, and that's far easier than trying to lean over and read the reading on the dial. So yeah, that's the kind of basics of multimeters. You do get what you pay for with an accuracy level, but I find this little beastie does me very, very well. It's a nice little meter. Never forget to turn it to off, because that way the power will last clearly a great deal longer, and these leads will kind of stow in these little side pockets down here, and they kind of go in like that. They don't quite stay in there, and then it just takes an elastic band to go around the body of the meter to keep everything tickety-boo. So, whoops, still can't get the wretched thing in now. Anyway, that lives in my little model railway box, and it's pretty good to go. I can't remember how much I paid for it. It was probably something like 25 quid, something like that. But you know, buyer beware. You do get what you pay for, and the last thing you want to do is start buying numerous multimeters. It's not like paintbrushes; they're quite expensive. Buy cheap, you'll buy twice. You know, don't get the cheap and nasty one. We've all done it. I've had ones before, and they don't take a hiding at all. You know, and it's a nice easy battery as well, so you're not into these, you know, CR cells, these little round batteries that cost a fortune. It's a basic fire alarm battery, and that thing has lasted me, yeah, I'd probably had that about 8 years now, and it's a good little multimeter. But you know, be very careful before you start working on house voltages and you know, circuits that you're not used to. You know, this is more for specialised electricians, but as for a railway modeler, when you're dealing with LEDs and, you know, low power AC and DC circuits, it's an ideal thing. Now, for the more observant amongst you, may have spotted this lighter that was left loafing on my desk, and I am not a smoker. I gave up smoking when I was 31. Hardest thing I ever did in my life. It's actually for that little lamp that's lurking in the corner, and there it is in all its beauty, and it's a kind of an appetizer for a forthcoming video for another little project I've got planned. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I've hunted the place down for a tiny little track tester that I bought a couple of weeks ago, which does AC DC, and it shows you've got the reverse polarity, and it's cheap and cheerful and lovely. Can't find it under a £5, need one of those. but when it turns up, I'll mention it in a future video. Those are my basic tools really for modelling. You know, there's loads of other things I use, pipettes and soldering irons and all the rest of it, which probably don't need much of an explanation. If you found it useful, please leave a comment below. And if you've got in mind tools that you use that perhaps I should have mentioned, another text, that I should have mentioned, perhaps, you know, leave that comment as well. And all it is really, it's to inspire all of us, you know, so we learn from each other and we kind of move on without making big financial mistakes, let's say. Anyway, there we go. As usual, I thank my patrons, and please don't forget to subscribe, and a video here and here. You know you've got time, and I'll catch you in a couple of weeks. Christmas is coming. Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.